Hello, and welcome to the Thinking Elixir podcast, where we cover the news of the community and learn from each other. My name is Mark Erickson.
And I'm David Bernheisel.
Let's jump into the news. First up, there's a new library called Phoenix Sync that is described as real-time sync for Postgres-backed Phoenix applications. So David, you helped to do all the deep sleuthing on this one. So back in 2024, ElixirConf, Jose gave a talk about the projects that never were. And in there, he created and announced a project called Sync. And you can find that we have a link to it, whereas on Jose Valim's GitHub, his personal GitHub, and it was called Sync. It was just a proof of concept, and he promptly archived it. And we were like, at the time, I remember we talked about it, we're like, what does this mean that it's archived? And so really what I think, if I understand it right, it's here's a proof of concept. I don't want to own this and push this forward. Someone else can pick this up and run with it. Mm-hmm. It sounds like someone else has picked it up and run with it. Mm-hmm. So it was announced at Codebeam, this new project called Phoenix Sync. It's not actually part of the Phoenix project or anything like that, or the organization. But they say, check it out if you're interested in building modern real-time apps on local-first sync in Elixir. So Brian Cardarella actually weighed in on this, because I was thinking, how would we use this? You know, who would use this? And Brian Cardarella weighed in saying that this ability to have local offline data was a big missing feature for LiveView Native. So you say, oh, LiveView Native, that would make a lot of sense because it is live-backed, and you do want local data. So what's interesting, though, is the company that makes this is Electric SQL, and the library actually uses their platform on the back end to help pull this off. So it is a local, HexPM GitHub open source project, but it's using their backend service. So just be aware of that.
But just to be clear, yeah, Jose never has always made it clear that this was not a thing. Yeah, that they were intending to push forward, officially. So yeah, even in his conference talk, which is not on YouTube for what it's worth, by the way. So don't go looking for it because it ain't there. Yeah, the old archived GitHub repo has his slides in it. If you wanted to go look at it, you just won't be able to view the video. But it's pretty interesting, just a reminder of what this is all about, right? We have LiveView channels that will it's a WebSocket to the client, right? And the WebSocket will push updates and keep things live, and then you can set up a stream on that over that WebSocket to push reactive updates from server to client. This is not that. So Phoenix Sync is not that. Phoenix Sync kind of works a lot like that, but it's brokered by Phoenix. But it's directly from the Postgres server, maybe not directly, but it's reacting from the database, like it's following the wall, if I remember correctly, like the write ahead log of Postgres, and then it pushes those updates over to the client, and so there's another library on the client side that helps manage that stream as well. So if you have LiveView and this Phoenix Sync thing going on, you kind of have two streams going on at the same time. I'll have to dig in a little bit more to figure out how these interact, if they are kind of coupled a bit. Yeah. Electric SQL makes a lot of sense here because it's in their domain, right? This is what they're all about. They're about local development with localized database. Yeah. But through the cloud-ish thing.
Yeah. Some of what's still not clear to me is this idea of, okay, if I'm thinking of a LiveView application, then any sort of interaction you're having with the LiveView, unless there's like a heavy JavaScript component to it, any interaction you're having with it requires communication to the LiveView process because state is changing and making things happen. So it's still not clear in my head about how this would actually work with offline mode and LiveView. So I'm not clear there.
Offline mode is, remember, so this is right. They're making changes on the client side. Mm-hmm. And so something has to, buffer that and then catch up. right? Because there's writes happening, on the Postgres side as well. And then there could be actions happening on the client side. And so that there's that, I don't know if it's technically the CRDT thing going on here, but there is that conflict resolution that has to happen. And Jose did talk a little bit about that, but it's not in his slides, I think. Anyway, and I'm sure he's a bit disconnected from this at this point, but I'm sure there's a lot more details. Maybe we'll have to revisit this to have a better understanding and have a more intelligent conversation about it. But it is very neat. It's very neat. So just to go to electricsql.com for a second and just to read a little blurb, but just so we have a better idea of what they're about. They say it's real-time sync for Postgres. Sync is the best way of building modern apps. Electric solves sync so that you don't have to. Electric syncs little subsets, and they have a link that describes what that is, what little subsets are, of your Postgres data into local apps and services so you can have the data you need in sync wherever you need it. And so they have a variety of services. Of course, I think they are like a database host. Think like Crunchy is for Postgres as well. But they have a little extra there to make that work quicker locally, so that way not everything is all on the cloud, but according to their little quote here, a little subset is on the local host side. And so shapes are their core primitive for controlling that sync in the Electric SQL ecosystem. So I guess you have some definition somewhere that says, all right, take this table and let people have a version of that, locally. And Electric is that front end service to Postgres that will handle, the communications back and forth.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure there's lots more to talk about there. Electric SQL seems pretty cool. Also kind of excited to see where Phoenix Sync goes.
Today's Thinking Elixir show is brought to you by our friends at Gig Elixir, the premier deployment platform for Elixir and Phoenix projects. If you use the promo code THINKING during signup, you get 20% off the standard tier prices for an entire year. That's thinking at gigelixir.com. Or you can visit gigelixir.com/thinking to sign up today and get 20% off your first year.
All right, next up, got a library that was released by Peter Solnika. He's releasing a library called Text Parser. He's got a blog post that accompanies it, so a good old example of how to use it. If you haven't heard of Peter before, he's the creator of the app called Just Cross Post. So you can find that app at justcrosspost.app. The idea there is that, you just cross post for social media. You just write once and post everywhere, right? Kind of like Buffer, and there's some other services out there that do similar things. Just cross post is written in Elixir, so pretty cool. And he's open sourcing a bit of that into the world. So the idea here is that it looks for interesting parts of some text, right? His use case is a social media post, a limited amount of characters. And so there's several components what could be in that post, such as hashtags, such as links, such as images or something like, that kind of stuff. And so this text parser can scan through that text and parse those interesting things into a struct. So for example, you don't have to, think about this in a purely social media kind of capacity, right? Imagine you have anything that's user input and you just want to get all the URLs that people can just paste in there, right? Maybe you just want to linkify it, on your own, just for convenience sake, or maybe you want to scan it or something. Who knows? But you just get a blob of text and you want to see all the links in it. So you can actually just throw that text in here. The text parser will go through it and give you all the links that it found and the position in the string that it was in. And there you go. And there's a lot more parsers that it can consume as well. So you don't have to just regex the heck out of your strings anymore. And I didn't actually look in the source code here. I don't know if he's using regex here either, but but given it says text parser, I'm going to guess it's not regex. There's probably a real tokenizer in here. But anyway, it seems pretty cool, a little lightweight library, and seems pretty universally interesting and useful as well. So pretty cool to see that come out in the world.
Yeah, I just think of other places where you'd see this in not just social media. And I was thinking, you're going to see this in a Jira style interface or a, Slack style thing, anything where you're having, just company information where people are putting in a lot of different content. You want to be able to pull out links and cross posts to other docs that are in the company even.
Yeah, they have tags like hashtags. They have mentions. So you can do the @ symbol.
Oh, yeah.
And at somebody, you got your URLs, and then you can write your own, as well.
Very cool. And next up, there was a new Elixir stream tip on finding the latest package version for a hex package locally. So the problem is, like, maybe I want to add Oben to a project. I'm like, what is the latest version of Oben? So I might have to go find it on hex PM to find out, what is the latest version here. And so he was just showing off this feature that's already built in. You already have it on your command line. It's mix hex.info. So if you just run hex.info with nothing else, it tells you a little bit about the project, the Elixir and Erlang versions. But if you put a hex package name after it, like Phoenix Live View, it will tell you this is the version that you have in your config that you have in your lock file. This is the latest version and the versions that are available, and just be able to see all that. And if it's something that's not in your project, you can do it there also, like with the Oben example, you could do mix hex info Oben. And it would tell you this is the latest version. Here's a list of their previous releases, the license, and links to a changelog, the GitHub, things like that. So it's been there a long time. I didn't know about it. I just appreciated the visibility that Herman Valesco was bringing to this feature that's already there. And I have been through that where it's like, oh, I need to go find what the latest version of this is. And that's handy to know. So I appreciated that, and we want to pass it along.
All right, next up, if you want to upgrade to Tailwind version 4, that's the latest one. It was a big rewrite, by the way. I think everything's in Rust now, even me. If you want to upgrade to version 4 and you're using that with your Phoenix app, there is an automatic upgrade helper, or code mod, as they say, right? As the kids say. Here is a guide that is on the Phoenix Framework's Tailwind library, right, which is the kind of the glue between Phoenix and the Tailwind binaries. Watchers, right? We need to start watchers up when we start the Phoenix server. That's what the Tailwind library does on Hex for us. And so they have a section now that is guiding folks how to upgrade from version 3 to version 4. So it's just a couple steps. I'll blow through it real quick, but you do want to upgrade the Tailwind library on Hex first. So you'll go to like version 0.3 at this point. Then you'll want to configure the library to go fetch the version 4 of Tailwind. You'll adjust some of the parameters that go in there. At that point, you kind of just go on to the normal Tailwind upgrade. They have a link to the Tailwind version 4 upgrade guide. So now you're in Tailwind land at this point. It's total CSS land, right? And you'll run npx @tailwindcss/upgrade. And that's how you get to their code mod. And that code mod will then do the modding of the code, and you'll have to review all the things that it did and make sure that everything's gravy at that point. And then you're good to go. One of the things that Tailwind 4 does is it kind of removes the Tailwind config.js file, and so you'll have to remove that and go reconfigure your things in native CSS. Which is a good change, I think. But if you have a lot going on in Tailwind, that might be a tedious step. If you've got a whole design system in there, this will be a task, but probably a good task. I imagine anyone that's doing design systems with Tailwind probably didn't love the JavaScript part of this config anyway. And so now they're getting rid of it and going back into native CSS. We talked about an episode or 2 or 3 ago. And so that's the idea here. Anyway, upgrade the Hex library, then upgrade your Tailwind library, and then run npx Tailwind CSS upgrade, and then go from there. And peace be with you at that point.
Yeah, I'm nervous to see. I haven't tried it yet, but I'm nervous to see how deep it goes, like into component source code and different files that are not Heeks extensions or anything like that. So yeah, I don't know. I'm crossing my fingers and hoping. Yeah. So if you have tried it, if you do this and you try it out, let us know. Just report back, and we would love to be able to share that it's working or that you hit a snag and what you had to do to fix it. Mm-hmm. And next up, Gleam version 1.9.0 was released. This was a big release. A lot of the improvements were around the language server, but there were some other things as well, like searchability and hex docs. And another thing was a echo debug printing for improved debugging output. This is kind of like the DBG in Elixir, where you could like just stick it in a pipe and get a whole bunch of interesting information out of it. So it looks like it's something more like that. Also, the ability to depend on a Git-hosted dependency instead of officially released versions. So we've had this in Elixir for some time, where you could just say, pull in this library, but use this GitHub repo and branch. So they're getting that also in Gleam. So congrats to the Gleam team. I like that, the Gleam team, on getting another release out.
All right, so an interesting blog post came out. Probably got what's the old term? Slashdotted.
Yep.
You know, got knocked offline for a while. Couldn't even read it. Here's the title. It says, "Everything I was lied to about Node.js came true with Elixir." Insta-click.
Yes, you know it's going to get some a lot of hornet's nest kind of thing.
I'll try to summarize it a bit. But yeah, you can already imagine from the clickbaity kind of title and the, you know, kind of ragey kind of tone there. It's like, oh, okay, let's sit down and get some popcorn. Here's the short version of it is that the writer here, you know, his name is Dylan Moore. Well, maybe I should have anonymized his name for his protection, but
it's on the blog post.
It's on the blog post.
He's taking credit.
Yeah. He first goes into concurrency versus parallelism, and he just says that Node is not good at that, and that Elixir is. It's just built like that. And by Elixir, we really mean Erlang at this point.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Node.js is concurrent, but it's really terrible at parallelism. He doesn't ignore that there are things like worker threads. There are ways around it. But doing both is really hard, and that's what Elixir and Erlang do really well. So that's one section. The other section is about fault tolerance. Okay, we know about this. We're Elixir fans here. He says that Node.js is terrible at fault tolerance. If the process crashes, the whole application crashes. You know, we kind of know that. He's taking a little heat here. He even comes back and edits his post and says, okay, fine. Maybe people are pointing out that I have skill issues, and maybe that is true. But you also have these very large ecosystems that have very problematic bugs with it. And he lists a couple of open issues at this point, all about memory leaks at this point, right? We know that Elixir processes can have memory leaks as well. I think just with our actor model, and this is what Dylan says as well, is this with the actor model, we're just a little less susceptible to those issues being long-lived, whereas Node.js programs typically are more long-lived for that kind of stuff. All right, performance. Here's a quote. I'm just going to rip it straight out. Here's a quote. "Imagine writing an application in C where you just spam malloc, memory allocation, and memcopy everywhere, including in loops. You'd be fired immediately. That's essentially what you're doing in Node." End quote. All right. He's got issues with Node. I do too. Node is very slow. It's too darn slow. So slow that Microsoft, the big behemoth that it is rewriting Node in Go.
Oh, burn.
Okay. All right, moving on. Scaling, he talks about scaling. We'll skip that one. But here's the quote here is that no one actually believes that Node can scale. He includes a Theo quote here. It says, "I would never want to scale a system that wasn't either written via entirely serverless patterns like Lambda or was written on top of the Erlang OTP in the Beam VM." So that was a quote by Theo that Dylan is also quoting. So Theo was a keynote speaker, by the way, at ElixirConf, and he talks about how Elixir made him a better programmer. So he is Theo's a fan of Elixir, though he does typically work in the JavaScript ecosystem. Yep. We've actually had good conversations, me and him, about these kinds of things. And yeah, serverless patterns entirely avoid a lot of the issues that Dylan has been like writing about so far. So that's one way to get around some of that stuff. And there's a whole lot more, but then I won't spoil it, but there's a nice play here that he lifted up from Reddit on the team structure and Elixir efficiency.
Yep.
Versus like typical, software stacks. We're used to it was the Elixir in Action book had a little table years ago.
Yeah,
that little table of services like caching would be on a typical stack would be handled by Redis, but in Erlang it's
Elixir.
Erlang.
Yeah.
And then and so on and so forth. It's all the same and all points to Erlang at this point. And so this is an expanded version of that table. I won't spoil it. You have to go look for yourself, but it's nice. Yeah.
It's fun because I feel like I'm personally living this one. It's bringing it, instead of the software stack, it's bringing it to the people, the team. Yeah.
And then I'll leave the rest of it for you to go read. But here's a lasting quote. It says, "The mental overload, the constant mental overload involving with writing Node is, will this block, or will this throw, or will this block? And whenever I'm writing any JS that will be long running, I'm highly aware of whether some code I'm writing will block or crash the rest of the application. And Elixir has none of this." So I'll leave it at that. It's generally, Elixir positive.
Yes.
And I'm not going to ignore that it's a bit it has a tone.
Yes.
In the article. So
it's not the kind of thing you're going to. It's not like a white paper that you would share with your boss on trying to convince them.
Yeah.
But there are points in there that he is making that it may resonate with you if you're in a similar situation.
So if you just happen to have some popcorn around, go grab it and go read this.
And next up, there is a library, Wasmex, was updated to version 0.10. So we've talked about Wasmex before, but we haven't really touched on it again. And with this new release, it just kind of comes up again. The GitHub project describes this as execute WebAssembly from Elixir. So that's what WebAssembly EX is all about. And they say, because the WebAssembly component model packages code in a portable binary format and provides machine-readable interfaces in WIT with a standardized ABI, which is Application Binary Interface, it enables applications and components to work together no matter what language they were originally written in. That sounds interesting. Like, there could be some WebAssembly components that you could leverage from your Elixir application.
Yeah, so it's just portable little bits of code that you can have talk to each other. That's really the big deal that's going on here. I'll be honest, when the first time I read this, I was like, Wasm web components? No way. I can but no, it's not web components. It's just regular components. Yeah, or regular reusable bits of code that can now talk to each other, which is going to be very interesting.
Cool.
Next up, we got Ash Weekly. So Ash, the ecosystem, has a lot of stuff going on. So they have a newsletter called Ash Weekly. You should go subscribe to that. It's on Substack. We'll have a link to it. And this is their 8th issue. So I'm just gonna pluck out a couple of really interesting things that I saw. The first one is that Ash, it's not called Ash Ops, I don't think, but it's like Ash Ops. It's like it is GitOps, right? Here's the idea: is that there's now another library part of the Ash ecosystem that gives you the ability to run mix tasks for some CRUD operations, hence the Ash Ops here. CRUD operations on your Ash resources, which is pretty clutch when you're working with some other devs that don't know how to get into the database or something. It's just not their native language. And so if you plug that, like mix task usage, like I can do mix, I don't know the exact things, but it's like mish ash dot search or something, and you can type in the resource name and then you can put in some filters or something. That's the idea, and this is all at the command line at this point, right? So you're not in IEX, you're not directly connected to the database, having the NoSQL and all. You're just mix tasking it. So if you plug that into some other stuff that's Ash has, which is a local AI, so you can actually converse with this AI thing, and it can know about all of these these resources as well, and it can do stuff for you, which is pretty great. Think of a useful chatbot, and that's kind of it for you. That can actually search and list and create things. So you can ask it, hey, do I have this album in my inventory? And it'll say, no, I don't see it. I do see this one. And then you can say, no, that's not it. All right, let's create another one. And then you have the interface, it'll give you all of the attributes that you need to provide it to create the resource, which is pretty great. That's in there. I thought that was really nifty. And then the other thing that I thought was really cool is that Beacon CMS is now included in the Ash HQ, which is their website. Ash HQ installer script. So when you go to Ash HQ, you'll be able to like pick a bunch of buttons and combinations of things that you want to install, and Ash with the power of Igniter will be able to pull in all of those libraries and get you a boilerplate application right from the get-go, which is pretty nifty to have a quick start with. So very nice. There's lots more in Ash Weekly. I just picked out a couple of things. And this is issue 8. So there's a lot of other issues that you can go for, catch up on all the things that are happening. There's another one about generating mermaid charts for reactors, Ash reactors. A reactor is kind of like a workflow, of functions, which is pretty nifty. So now you can like visualize that with mermaid graphs, which is pretty cool. All right, I'll stop there, but there's lots of stuff happening in Ash. You should go check it out.
And next up, a new Google Chrome browser update brings a new feature. It's called Command and Command 4. They have a blog post on the Developer Chrome blog, and so we have a link to that. But think like Phoenix Live View JS, but in the browser. So the idea here is to add a Command 4 attribute to a button pointing to another element by ID, and then also a command attribute that specifies the action you're wanting to run. Then you add an event listener to the target element and check the event.command and run your logic. There's a couple of built-in commands. Now, David, I think you'd looked into this a little bit deeper than I have. So what else is there to know about this?
So it's not just command and command 4. I mean, that would be boring on its own, right? That's not much more than event listeners, but they have a couple of built-in ones. And so that's where things get a little bit easier for everyone. And so the typical operations you might be doing is things like popovers and showing or closing modals. That's the big idea here. Well, first up, if you're showing and closing modals, you're already wrong.
I'm going to die on that hill, David. I'm going to die on that
hill. Don't be doing modals. All right, sorry. I digress. But showing and hiding and toggling popovers and showing modals are all very common things. And it's never just show the thing, but it's also transition it, or it's also change the ARIA attributes, for accessibility and things like that. It's always more than just that. And so these commands are going to help do all that for you. So there's a couple of built-in commands called show-popover, there's hide popover, toggle, there's show modal, and then close. A lot of these are dealing with dialogues and popovers. So if you're not unfamiliar with those attributes, you should go look those up as well. But you can specify elements to be a popover, and there is, if you haven't been keeping up, there is a dialogue HTML element now that is like a modal, and so it has some handling on it for dealing with that well, and so show modal and close is good for those. Yeah, so those are the built-in ones. This was announced by Chrome, so it's not everywhere yet. So it is on the latest Chrome, I think, but Safari and Firefox do have them, but they're behind feature flags, so they won't work quite yet. But given that they're behind feature flags, it sounds like they're not far behind. When I saw this, I was like, this is Phoenix Live View JS, but like part of the browser now, which is pretty nifty. I wonder what Live View JS is going to have to do to like maybe just transition to using these things. But I don't know, maybe it's not quite compatible, but I would like to think that some Chrome developer out there is an Elixir fan and they saw Phoenix JS and you're like, what if we just put this in the browser natively? Pretty cool things. I'm excited for that.
If the other browsers already have something built in about this, then okay, this wasn't just hey, we're adding a browser specific feature, that would be ultimately trying to divide the community and the platform, the web platform. So it sounds like this is really going through like the web consortium or something like that, where all the browser vendors will be adding it. We'll include a link on the caniuse.com. Is this a feature that you can use at what versions of what browsers, which is a really helpful resource. What I'm going to be wondering about is, when do the mobile interfaces, like the old Androids, will they be getting an update for this? Because they probably will, because Google Chrome is part of a Google Play. So it's a different experience thing. I'm looking forward to anything that becomes part of the general web platform that we can start to count on to simplify other things that have become standards in the way just we work with, like mobile web and just web in general. I'm excited to see that happen. So we'll have to come back to that in the future.
I'm glad you mentioned mobile browsers because, they don't support that yet. And it's because they can't. These are popovers and modals. People stop using them. All right, moving on. Conferences. We're going to round up some conferences. We'll go through a couple of these pretty quick, but we've got a lot of activity in the in the world. And the first one up is Codebeam Lite. So that's codebeamstockholm.com. We've got a link to some announcements over there. It's in Stockholm this year on June 2nd. It's a one-day, one-track conference, so very simple, no decisions other than just how do I get there.
Yeah, their keynote speaker is Björn Gustafsson, who is the B in Beam. So part of the original team, part of the original OTP team that created Erlang. He works at Ericsson, currently on the OTP team. So he's going to be the keynote speaker. So that's like awesome just to be able to meet him and see what he's talking about. And the next one is AlchemyConf is coming up. It's March 31st through April 3rd in Braga, Portugal. They provided a discount code for us to share with you. It's for 10% off. You can use the discount code ThinkingElixir, all caps, on your checkout. We'll have a link to that in the show notes as well.
All right. Also is Gig City Elixir and NervesConf. That's gigcityelixir.com. NervesConf is on May 8th, and Gig City Elixir is on May 9th and 10th. That's happening in Chattanooga, Tennessee, USA. We might see a wild Keithley show up there. We'll find out. Another one is ElixirConf EU. It's elixirconf.eu. That's happening on May 15th and the 16th. That's in Krakow and virtual. So if you can't make it out to Krakow, that's in Poland, by the way, then a virtual ticket might be in your future. ElixirConf EU typically has a lot of good announcements in it. And then last up, Goatmeyer. Goatmeyer tickets are on sale as well, and that's goatmeyer.com. Easy domain to pick up, probably really cheap too. And that's September 10th and the 12th in Varberg, Sweden. Very beautiful place. I'm just joking about the cheap domain, but really, goatmeyer.com, that's, I'll never get over the name of it.
Yeah, we got to ask Lars how he came up with that name.
Yeah, it's just a dartboard on two words. Goatmeyer. He probably likes both of those words. Yeah, I don't know. Fun name.
And that's it for the news. Today, we're being joined by two special guests from the Erlang Ecosystem Foundation. We have Alistair Woodman and Jonathan Mention. Welcome to the show, guys.
Hello. Thank you.
So we're really excited to have you on, Jonathan. You are involved as I understand it, the CISO or CISO, Chief Information Security Officer, and you're involved with the security working group on the Erlang Ecosystem Foundation. So we're really looking forward to understanding more about what is going on, learn more about you and your involvement. But before we get into all of that, I'd love to hear a little bit more about each of you, like where you are and what you're up to.
Yeah, so greetings from San Francisco. I'm at Codebeam US, taking time out from the busy schedule. There's a bunch of presentations ongoing at the moment. And I'm hoping some of you guys will have been attending remotely or were actually at the event. And it's a great opportunity to meet and greet. So that's what I'm up to at the moment.
Hi, I'm Jonathan. I'm unfortunately not at Codebeam, even though I would love to be there right now. I'm just sitting in my boring little office back at home in Switzerland. Certainly going to be at other conferences again in the future. ElixirConf Europe, for example, where people can also meet me in person.
And Alistair, we've had you on the show before. So folks that are listening, if you check the show notes, we'll have a link to that. It's back in episode 220. But it was good to have you on back then. We even talked about security back then, which is a little bit of the background of why and how we got back together, today. Also, congrats at being at Codebeam. I am also very jealous. Really would love to be there. And in Krakow in ElixirConf EU later. Sorry, Jonathan, I won't be able to see you there. But yeah, those are all two great conferences. So, Alistair, I know you're being a little modest there. We've had you on the show before, but just a little bit more background. You're currently the president of the EEF. Is that still correct?
Yes, the president basically files the taxes and holds the agenda for the board meeting. So I don't think it's that different a role than all the other members on the board. But I do have to pick up the pieces related to the administration work, and Seb's my treasurer, and he does all the stuff for treasurer and secretary work. But yeah, that is indeed the case.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Jonathan, I wanted to ask you, how long have you been with the EEF now?
I believe by now it's around a bit more than 3 years.
Okay.
Might be off by one in either direction.
That's a common programming problem. Yeah, I get it.
I initially joined when I started looking into the OpenID stuff that I also did for the foundation a bit more than a year ago, and kind of got swept into the group and really liked to be part of that group and the things we're doing. And yeah, so I've been part of the security working group for around 3 years. And now since the start of the year, I'm additionally the CISO of the foundation.
And the CISO is Chief Information Security Officer. So what does that entail? What does that really mean? What honorific, responsibilities does that imply?
I mean, we're figuring all of that out ourselves as well at the moment. But so far, there is basically 2 things that I'm focusing on. One of them is around compliance topics. So we're trying to figure out a way so that companies that have heightened compliance requirements are able to use our technologies in their stack without having to certify everything down to the last little line of C code that Erlang comes with. And especially since in the EU very soon, a lot of this is going to be required also for smaller companies that have no chance of actually doing that. So we try to prepare the ecosystem for that. The second topic I'm in at the moment is around supply chain security. At the current state, I would say the things that we have implemented, like the package manager, Hex, and these kind of things, they're in a good state, they're stable, but they're also lacking a lot of features that ecosystems that just have a lot more resources available have implemented. And I would like to catch up with that to really make sure that our supply chain story in the ecosystem is as safe as it can be.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up the supply chain side of the security, because that's one of the things we've been talking about. There was a recent announcement about the open chain for OTP and Elixir. I'd like to understand a little bit more about why this was important. My gut reaction is, this is the kind of thing that big enterprises and maybe governments care about. Is that the case? Is there more to it? Help me out.
Let me go back a little bit in this from the Genesis perspective. So the open chain stuff started as a direct conversation between the EEF and Ericsson last year at the Linux Foundation conference in Vienna. And at the time, there was a presentation from Ericsson and Nokia about open chain stuff. Ericsson is I think the chair of the open chain development, and it is an enterprise, mostly telecoms environment. So Cisco's a member, Juniper, folks who build, telecoms equipment have started this project. And it was pretty obvious to me when I sat through the presentation that I went to Jimmy, who's in the OSPO at Ericsson afterwards, and said to him, are you talking to the OTP team about this? Because clearly Ericsson said they're going to go do all this. That sort of precipitated both internally, the Ericsson OSPO office talking to their OTP team internally, and we, the EEF, talking to them from externally, figuring out how we could actually get this process moving to meet Ericsson's deadlines. And it then became pretty obvious to me and Jonathan, as we started talking about this, that we needed to make it more than just whatever happens for OTP for Ericsson, and that this would benefit the whole of the community. And as such, we needed to go do this for all of the community. And to your point there, Mark, it looks on the surface like it is only big enterprise, but the tendrils of this will start reaching out into small and medium business relatively quickly. Yeah. They're going to get dragged along for the ride too. So we want to be proactive and make this happen. And so I'll now hand over to Jonathan to fill in the rest of the details.
Cool. So Jonathan, you did mention like that in the EU, that smaller and medium-sized businesses are going to have that regulation. So before diving into that, Alistair, you had mentioned that there was that Linux Foundation conference that you went to where this stuff was created and started by these telecom companies. And something tells me that these telecom companies aren't doing it for the safety of the world. They're probably doing it because they're getting pressure from some other regulatory outfit, probably some governments. And so the EU typically is a little faster when it comes to protecting consumer rights. Burn, USA. But why? Could you help me understand why this is happening? I get the what and that there's regulation happening, but why is the regulation happening?
I think it's really just long overdue, right? The CRA and a bunch of the other European regulations, and not to forget the CISO regulations that have been coming out, and I think will still continue to come out in the US. The issue of product safety from everywhere, from stuff killing you or poisoning you to just depleting your bank account, has been around for the longest period of time in the hardware space. And I think everybody's finally gotten to the point where they realize that, software's eating the world, as the story goes, right?
Gotcha.
So it used to be hardware, right? And now everything's got software components in it. And they're just applying the same careabouts because they're getting to hear from, they can see the damages, right? In terms of, people getting taken to the cleaners, bad stuff happening.
Right.
So it's on the front page of the news, and they want to get active because otherwise they'll have angry electorate, and they don't want that at the moment. So they're going to do something about it.
Yes, I just wanted to pause and mismention. So you mentioned CRA. If I understand that right, that's the Cyber Resilience Act in the EU. And then you mentioned CISA, which is the U.S. government's Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. There we go.
Right. Yeah.
Just to bring it back to something that I've been hearing recently is Chinese hackers that are government-sponsored, government organization ones, are in the U.S. telecom systems, and the U.S. was unable to get them out. And they've been in there for like years. So it's like the U.S. government cares about this too.
Yes.
All the way up and down the stack, right? We want to be able to secure our own infrastructure as a nation, and every nation has that interest.
Gotcha.
This will not be a European-only thing. There is already legislation going through the UK. Japan has its own flavors of these things. Australia is talking about this, and you'll see it everywhere, right? Many of those legislative or technical requirements will typically get borrowed, like they have done before between different areas. And it's going to be interesting how many people borrow from whose standard sets, but they're not going to create, small countries like maybe Singapore or something like that won't come up with their own standards. They'll just say, do a whole bunch of these things from this place. But there'll be 4 or 5 possibly major flavors of this stuff, and there'll be a strong overlap between these things.
Gotcha. To bring us to what, do these things, what that actually means is the open standard of open chain. So Jonathan, tell us what kind of work you've been doing with open chain in regards to, Elixir. So we're up to the point of like Ericsson and the OTP team. We've talked about it in the news where the OTP team now supplies the software bill of materials for the stuff that includes it. But what about everything after that?
So my primary motivation to get started with OpenChain is actually the SBoM part, so the software bill of materials. Doing OpenChain basically entails doing SBoMs. In this case, source SBoMs, not build SBoMs. They're a bit different. Source SBoM is a good place to get started. What this change allows me to do is to generate the source SBoM for each release of Elixir specifically, go through all the files, we collect all the hashes, and at the end, when we actually write the release to the GitHub releases page, which is also used in the Docker images and ESDF and basically everywhere, then we can attest to that release using that SBoM. What that allows you to do is to basically backtrack what were the ingredients to make up that release. That's just essentially part of OpenChain or a bit on top. To actually implement all of OpenChain, it's really important that OpenChain is mostly focused around copyright and licensing. So that companies, for example, that they make sure that they only use software that which is licensed in a way so they are actually allowed to use it without publishing all their own source code, etc. It's kind of focused on these things. And so implementing OpenChain meant that we had to go through basically every file in the Elixir repository and make sure that we properly declare who has licensing and copyright on these files. Some of them were very, very simple because they were just written inside of Elixir and by the Elixir team. So essentially the copyright and the license gets very simple. But there's also other stuff like, for example, the repository contains a logo and their trademark rules apply, or it contains files from Unicode to do all the string Unicode parts. And so we had to be careful when we went through to really make sure that all these IP things were declared correctly, so that also the report that comes out is declaring it correctly.
That's interesting because you mentioned that and it's like, oh yeah, there's other stuff going on, like the time zone database gets downloaded.
Right.
There's other stuff that's coming into the ball of what we're delivering that isn't all from Elixir.
Yes. Time zone is a bad example because it isn't contained in Elixir. That's an extra library. But the theory applies, yes.
And maybe that's part of it, though. I remember having a conversation with Kip Cole, who does the CLDR libraries for Elixir. Maybe this is just an assumption I came to on my own, but if I recall correctly, that's why the time zone databases are like that, is because it can't necessarily ship with things for licensing reason. You have to pay for CLDR, access to all of the Unicode things at some point, or at least the documentation to it. I'm not sure how exactly it works out. And so when Elixir apps, just by the convention that we've come up with and just how we normally operate now, Elixir apps, like you said, doesn't ship with the time zone database. You have to go fetch it, which puts the liability on the user, not Elixir that's shipping that stuff. It's not a restrictive license where you have to like Xcode on Mac, you always have to accept the licensing terms to use the stuff that it ships with. Before you can use it. Like time zone databases, I guess, are a bit more permissive, so you don't get clobbered with agreements everywhere every time you start up your Elixir app. But that's kind of the same like operating principle. Maybe I'm getting that incorrect, but yeah, it was fascinating to read about that. And then all of the other software, you're talking about this just for the Elixir, stuff for Elixir, but not for our apps that we're building with Elixir, which has all of its own mixed dependencies.
Well, so just as an interesting interjection there, on the security working group this week, no, actually the embedded working group this week, Frank Hundleth was on there, and it's precipitated the nerves community to actually do the same thing for reuse compliant related to their file, because it's essentially a subset of the stuff that Jonathan was talking about, which is to put at the file level everything associated with copyright. And I know this looks like, and it's a lot of grunt work for no apparently obvious reason. But as all major projects start to do this, the supply chain software stuff will be able to figure out what's going on. And that's what people will care about, right? And they can deal with exactly this class of problems. People can figure out, oh, I need to have that licensing thing done, or I need to do this stuff, because it will be very obvious in a directed graph about what things you've inherited and also what liabilities you have from a licensing perspective, right? And then you have to go deal with them, whatever they are.
Jonathan, you had mentioned the source bill of materials, but there was another one, the build of materials. Can you at least just define what the other one's doing then?
There is various types of SBoMs. There is source, build, runtime. There's even hardware, cryptography bombs. So there's various types of these bills of material for different purposes. The source SBoM is really focused on defining what is the contents of the repository, and is also very focused on licensing, copyright, that kind of thing. The build SBoM is much more concerned with how did we get to that compiled state, to that release of that software? So it would contain this binary was made up of these source files, and those compiler flags were set, etc. So it's really describing going from source to a build that you can use.
Oh, that sounds so tedious.
That's why you want to automate it, right?
Yeah, you have to automate this. My goal eventually will be that we can essentially, for each Elixir or Erlang or other application on the Beam, that we can basically say for each module, which in the compiled output is its own file, where it came from. But there's quite a few steps to do before we get there. Right now, we were focused on the core, so the languages themselves, which work differently from normal applications in the ecosystem. For example, Mix, our build tool in Elixir, is not really used as it would be used in a library, just because you kind of have like a chicken egg problem there. And to really make it possible for the whole ecosystem to do open chain compliance properly, if they wish to do so, then we essentially will need to support our build tools in these kind of scanner projects so that they can scan the supply chain. That will mean to build support for Gleam, for Mix, for Rebar into these tools. Like the one we're using for Elixir is called OSS Review Toolkit, ORT. And getting support for these package managers and build tools into there will enable the whole community to do the same.
So if I recall correctly, I think Mix a year or two back changed the way that you specify licenses in the package when you publish them. A time ago, it used to be just a string, just whatever you put in there. But then they changed over to a more idiomatic way of expressing those specific licenses, so that way there could be some consistency gain. So I'm sure there's legacy ones out there that were published, back in, I don't know, 1999 or whenever. Elixir's not that old, but real early, where they were just never touched again, and they still got either no license or which I guess has rules around it when no license is supplied, but or have some untraditional expression of what that license is, some just random string in there. I guess that's one. And maybe not directly connected to the effort that you're talking about, but like that's one way that these package managers and build systems, probably need to at least assist for these code scanning kind of mechanisms like you're talking about, ORT, to be able to even lift that stuff out of the particular project that you're looking at. I'll pause here too, because Elixir Lang announced the open chain stuff that it was working on. I read that and I was thinking, oh my gosh, now I can get an SBOM out of my app, and that was incorrect. I tweeted that and everything, and I was like, oh nope, I got that way wrong. So I guess in anticipation of my incorrectness, of what I was leading this to be, that it wasn't, I assume that is a future thing, right? That at some point there at least be a tool, built in or not, I don't know, that Elixir developers using Mix, and then eventually Gleam, and each of its each of those ecosystems would have to be able to produce their own SBoMs. Does that sound right? Is that the direction?
There is people currently in the community working on improving the SBOM support for the ecosystem. It is based on a library, which Bram, a person in the security working group, initially wrote. It's called Rebar Free SBOM. The effort currently is on actually making it work well. There is currently some issues around only certain formats are supported. Others were really hard to be supported because, for example, JSON was not part of the standard library, and therefore this library was built as an eScript, if I'm not mistaken. You can't have any dependencies. And so there was various issues, and a lot of them have been solved. And so, there's an active effort to improve all of that. Once that is done, that also allows us to do the integrations into these source scanning tools like ORT better, because instead of writing a specific package manager integration into every single tool out there, the idea is that we produce a nice SBOM and give that to these scanning tools. And therefore, we don't have to hand build each integration into every product out there.
Okay, that's interesting. So you mentioned and I've got a link to this in the show notes, ossreviewtoolkit.org/ORT. So that's an existing tool that's outside of Elixir, and you're saying there are certain steps that we can take on the Elixir side to make our software and make the information available to that tooling to be able to package it up and whatever else needs to happen.
Exactly. They're also not ready yet on their side.
Okay.
There's an open issue to support SBOM as a first-class citizen input into the tool, but I think it's quite important to them, so I'm sure this will land soon. And yes, if we can then produce standardized output from our ecosystem, we can plug it into any other place that allows you to work with these standards. And actually, there's not one tool out there. There's quite a lot of these things out there. And it would really be a really large job to try to support all of that. And trying to find a standardized route to make it possible to support multiple of these tools, I think is really the way to go.
Gotcha. So what I'm hearing is that on the top of all of my modules, I need a module doc that states that I copyright David Burdenheisel 2024, this thing I grant thee to the company on this day, and it is working on, I'm just joking, but I do remember like looking at a bunch of like C header files, and yeah, there's like at least 100 lines at the top of all of them that all individually on all of them, not the projects, but on each file. Just all that to say is that we're coming a long way, I guess, in standardizing the way to state, the licensing, but also to state, all this critical information. I feel like we've got a spotlight on half the process here. Right, the spotlight being on the licensing, right? So the legal parts of it, you're protecting yourself from lawyers and yourself, maybe, right? But there's the other half of it that we talked about at the top of the show, where all these companies are getting ransomed because they have software that had security vulnerabilities and they got hacked, right? What is the SBOM, doing about that kind of stuff?
The SBOM really helps you figure out if you got hacked, essentially. So if you're using something and, I don't know, you have log4j somewhere in there, that was a big example in the past.
Yeah.
Am I affected? Do I have the affected version installed? As long as you directly install these things, that might be a very simple thing to answer, but you have transitive dependencies first, so they might be 4 levels down. But it could be even worse. It could be something that you installed via apt-get in your Docker container, where you then put your Elixir application in. And the goal really is to have an SBOM that describes the whole thing in the end in production, with every piece that is in there, so that you can figure out what your software is made of, and therefore, are you affected with these things?
So that makes sense, right? Like, especially when you're thinking like all the way down through the Docker container to the individual tools that you may have loaded in. And the whole question is, if a vulnerability is discovered in one of these tools, we want to quickly figure out all of the projects in our organization that may be affected. And then so that we can get updates and deploy
or shamefully hide from our customers and don't have any updates about the stuff that we were vulnerable to.
Right, true. But it's even going to work at a higher level than that, right? Is that some of the cloud hosters will want to know what your bill of materials looks like, right? Because if they've been told that there's a vulnerability for some particular library, they may want to actually throttle traffic coming to all of the applications which are using vulnerable libraries and avoid DDoSing and a whole bunch of things. So you're thinking in terms of just your company's thing, and you should, right? Yeah. But if you're running it on a hosting thing, think about them trying to manage for, distributed attack surfaces and a whole bunch of other things. It's going to be used across the board for this. If the technology starts to work properly, it will provide the ability, and this is part of the way that the law works, is that the law is saying you will need to respond within 24 hours if you know you've got bad stuff in your thing. And one of the ways that this may start to get implemented is that hyperscalers might say, well, we've got these guys on a watch list now for their applications because the following applications have known vulnerabilities. And if we start to see people doing things against them because people are going to figure out what's going on, and bad actors might start trying to do stuff that they will actually, as part of their services, try to dampen that down and stop it happening, right?
Yeah.
That brings an interesting question. I'm just curious about this. I've never thought about this before, but with the software bill of materials, is that published publicly? Is that something that a malicious person could find the software bill of materials and say, we now know who we can target for a vulnerability at a lower level? Or are these like private and they're shared just with companies and vendors and things like that?
I believe it's a second. I'm not aware of any compliance frameworks that are even the ones being defined right now that would require you to send these to all your customers directly. It's certainly important inside of the supply chain. So if you put a radio into your car and then you have to figure out what was in this radio. So in the supply chain, I think it applies. And for open source, it makes a lot of sense as well. Mm-hmm. But I don't think people are going to start putting up the SBOM for the website, for the SaaS you're currently looking at.
The closest you can get is just all the licenses that they are legally required to like repost that they're using.
Right. This is why there are different flavors of these SBOMs being posited, right? So you'll see some of them will be, and they are used for different things, and they'll have different levels of disclosures in terms of where you figure things out, right? So the licensing stuff is very clear that if you've used something, most of the licenses insist that a user can actually find out what software is being used and see the licenses themselves, right?
Yeah.
But they would not necessarily understand whether you've got which versions of things, whether you've got old versions, right, new versions, and all those other types of things. So they could make some level of educated guess, right?
Yeah.
But that's why you have these specific bill of materials type of things, so that you yourself know whether you're going to do this. So hopefully the folks on the defense side have more clues than the guys on the attack side.
So thinking about all right, the incident happens. I'm focused on me. I'm going to look at my software, and normally when an incident happens, you see something that's published, and typically these are the CVEs, right? So there's some authority or some database out there. Dependabot, I think, looks at these as well. Dependabot is an automated dependency checker on these CVEs, and they tell you when things are insecure, or that you need to upgrade, or just generally just need to upgrade at all. But again, the incident, I look at my software, I look at all the versions I have, and I compare it to what the CVE says. The CVE says usually, I'll just make up something, but Phoenix 1.1, is affected by this. Make sure you upgrade to Phoenix 1.2, right? Something along those lines. And then I do the thing, and then I'm clear, and I can breathe another day, right? Hopefully, right? Until the next one. Yep. But there's got to be something there for us to figure out, to consolidate around. What is that going to look like? Okay, so I got the SBOM, but now what?
There's kind of like two sides to the story of vulnerability reporting. The first one is a place where you can actually report things. A lot of projects don't really think about this. They just publish their thing, might have been a hobby, and suddenly a lot of people are using it, and they never really thought about what happens if I f*** up. That happens. Really the thing to do here, and there's also on the security working group EF page, there is a guide to this. It's really important that you establish rules of how people deal with findings if they find anything broken security-wise in your project. Normally, you would want to set up a security policy that specifies how people can contact you, the maintainer, about these things securely. So people don't just open up an issue in your GitHub and suddenly everyone can see a vulnerability that could be exploited. Once you did that and you're actually getting these reports, you will probably want to get a CV number for things. If the finding is an actual finding, you might also just get stuff that isn't relevant. In this case, you will not want to. But if it's an actual vulnerability, it's important that a lot of systems later in the reporting process know that they're talking about the same thing. And this is what a CVE is for. A CVE, you essentially have to request a number for your vulnerability. And that number comes from a CNA, so a CV numbering authority. Right now, there is essentially no CNA covering Elixir, for example, which means that you fall back all the way to the root CNA, which is MITRE. Unfortunately, they're also dealing with a lot of these reports, so they're also falling behind a bit often on these things. And at the same time, they have absolutely no knowledge on Elixir because they're doing it for everybody, or Erlang or Gleam or whatever you're using. This is actually why we've started. We're currently in the application process at the EF to become a CNA. We're specifically going to cover Erlang, Elixir, Gleam, Hex, the package manager, and a few other repositories. And also as a fallback, so if nobody declares a more direct CNA, a fallback for all Hex packages. This will allow us at the EF to have a closer look. We know what is a vulnerability and what is not, and what is, I don't know, a feature of the language and is designed this way and you're just using it wrong, or it's an actual vulnerability, these kind of things. And that allows us to take control over that process.
Gotcha. Great. So the EEF is in the application process to become a CNA, which is the authority for issuing CVEs for all Hex packages out there, which includes a number of ecosystems, which is incredible news. So I'm very excited about that, and also very sorry that you guys are having to do that.
I imagine there's so much spam of like, oh, you get those automated things all the time. Like, you have to pay me money for me to tell you about this pretend vulnerability.
We do hear that happens.
Yeah.
Yes. But yes, we are applying. It took quite a while. I hope by the end of this month, we're going to have the onboarding meetings done. And then it's a short road from there to actually be approved, as far as I understand. But yes, we're planning to do that. That would mean that we are the fallback CNA for all of the Hex packages.
Gotcha.
Right.
Yeah.
This still means you as a Hex package can decide to go somewhere else. So you can report your stuff if you want to with GitHub. You can open up your own CNA and scope your own project in there. But if nobody else is showing up and you're not declaring it differently, then we're going to show up for that.
Gotcha.
That makes sense, which I really appreciate because, if there was a security vulnerability in some little library I created years ago that people happen to be still using, and there was a problem, someone needs to know. So, and being at the package manager is a great place because the package manager could say, it's just not safe to host this. It's not being maintained. We can shut it off. That becomes an option.
Yes. That goes into the second part of the whole vulnerability story. Now that it has been reported somewhere, what do you do with that info? There is currently a package called Mix Audit. There's an automation that pulls it in from the GitHub vulnerability database. How that works is somebody opens the CVE right now, and unfortunately the CVE is not going to contain enough information to identify the package. And then somebody tells GitHub that this is the following Hex package, and then it will be in that repo. That's really cool that it exists, but that's not really the target solution we would like. The target solution we would like is, first, if you're browsing a package on Hex and we know it's broken, you should probably see that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Same in your CLI. If you're installing a package that maybe wasn't broken when you got started with it, but now it is, again, you should see that.
The closest thing right now is just whether or not it's been retired, which probably correlates with, can at least correlate with security issues, or something's completely borked in it.
But that's interesting though, because like if I'm writing a little tool just for myself that I'm not going to be posting publicly anywhere, and there is some type of vulnerability in it, I can just take that on and say, well, I'm running this manually as a little helper script, right? It's fine. I'm fine with that, right? It gives me the option to choose. So I think that's cool.
Yeah, we really want to get it into the default tooling, so people who are doing what they are doing right now will get the benefits, and not via the retirement feature, because the retirement feature is a declaration the maintainer does.
Right.
In a lot of cases, if the maintainer is not around to fix it, he's probably also not going to retire it. So it's kind of not the best feature for that. And we also want to provide the data in a format so that more enterprisey stacks can work with it as well. Let's assume you have 100 microservices. There is tools like Guac, for example, from the OpenSSF, where you can throw all your SBoMs in, and you can also throw all the vulnerability disclosures in, and it will actually tell you if something is wrong. Yeah, making this work in the small scale for people, which are just doing what they're doing right now, but also in the large scale, this is kind of the focus we have. We want to cover all of this.
Unfortunately, we're coming close to time. So I did want to talk about some of the future things that you have planned and where some of this might be going next.
I have thought about a lot of things that I would like to implement. That includes things like the actual vulnerability handling we just talked about in Hex, but also other things like build provenance or further SBOM improvements even after the current work is finished, and actually lots more. But unfortunately, that is a lot more than I can actually build by myself in a reasonable amount of time. And so I've started defining a roadmap that I intend to be public in the future, kind of outlining what we think from the EF that should be implemented. And that should also allow us to coordinate a lot better these kind of works and also use it for fundraising and other kind of purposes. Yeah, I'm planning to publish something on that note quite soon. And I would also be happy to talk to you again once that is in a state ready to be shared and is actually actionable.
Nice.
Once people can start jumping in. You shared a few items here on the roadmap. I just want to give a call out to a couple of them because these are cool, right? Like one is Hex account security, 2FA improvements, phishing resistant MFA like WebAuthn, brute force protections, like all these kinds of things. Like, oh yeah, I can just look at this list and say, these are all great to haves. But yeah, we need more people to be involved. And I can totally see a lot of people saying, oh, I would love to help out on this particular one. And oh, I could help out on that one.
Yes, there's larger and smaller things going to be on this list. And certainly there's the possibility to do some of them just via other people contributing it. There's also bigger parts where you would probably at least need your employer backing you, just because you're not going to be done in 2 days. It's probably going to take you 2 or 3 months or something like that.
Sponsored time, that makes sense.
At the same time, what would also work is sponsoring with the EF, so we can coordinate these kind of efforts.
Right, because if people are able to financially sponsor and support the EEF, then you can say, hey, we can pay a contractor to work on this particular feature to help deliver that. So I think that's awesome.
Exactly.
So we've talked about a lot of stuff happening in the future, and our dear listeners may have something that they want to do about that. What can they do? Where do we go from here as the listener?
If you're proficient in these kind of topics and you want to get very directly involved, we would very much like to welcome you in the security working group. To do so, join the EF Slack and the security working group channel. We'd be happy to have you as part of this project. If you're not proficient in these kind of topics, then I would recommend keeping your ears open for the things we actually do build in the future so that you can be an adopter of these things. Another thing you can already do is try to implement kind of like best practices for the code you're writing. For example, through the mentioned security vulnerability disclosure guide on the EF website, but also other efforts like, for example, the OpenSSF best practices batch that you can implement for your projects.
Gotcha. And just to clarify there, if they did want to get into that Slack channel, I think that means that they need to have they need to become a member of the EEF. There are several tiers of being a member.
Well, basic membership is at no cost, right?
Yeah,
so basic membership is and I have a couple of things I've seen that kicked off today just because we were talking in the hallway, so it's easy for people to join. No cost.
Yeah, no cost. Though if you really need to help in some other way, even if it is no cost, there are paid memberships that is going to be really helpful for the EEF in all areas as well. So I just wanted to call that out.
And what I like about conversations like this one is bringing a little bit more awareness and shining a light on the things that the EEF is doing makes people feel a whole lot better about wanting to contribute financially or with time, right? They see, this is effort well spent and this serves the entire community. So I appreciate what you guys are doing. Thank you very much for all that work.
And we appreciate what you're doing.
Yes, it was great being on here. Thank you very much.
Well, if people want to get in touch with you more directly, maybe follow-up questions from this discussion or just something else, so they want to follow you online to see what you're up to, where should they go to do that?
I have an online presence in quite a lot of places. GitHub, if it is about a specific thing that you want to talk about, just GitHub issues. But also you can find me on Blue Sky, on X, And I'm also on the on various Slack channels, like for example the Elixir Slack or the Erlang Slack, and many of the forums. And I essentially have the same username everywhere, so it should be simple to find.
Awesome. We've got a link to that in the show notes.
Well, you can find me at on the EEF Slack, on LinkedIn, and my email is awoodman@earlyf.org.
Well, thank you guys so much for coming on. And yeah, we will have to have you back on later when there's something more specific and you're like, okay, we are ready. Here's the list of stuff. Here's what we need you to do. And I look forward to hearing more about that. But unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you for listening. We hope you'll join us next time on Thinking Elixir.